Hi.
Hi.
All right, super pumped. Here we go. Thank you first for finding additional time to meet this week and being flexible with just having a few people out. It's been a little wonky, but pretty good, so we're good to go. All right, so I just want to jump right in and start with we've been working on this shift into like more tightly aligned and like longer independent practice, like tightly aligned to Common Core state standards and PARC and longer independent practice. And this week, I've seen all your lessons except today, and I even saw like a minute of today, but not much. Your lessons have consistently met that bar, and pacing has continued to get stronger. So I would like ask kind of like, what do you think has been leading to that success? Like why?
I feel like making sure that the key points are actually preparing kids for what they're doing saves so much time, because there's been a lot less of the, okay, pause, let me explain this again and regroup kind of thing. Also, when we like narrow it down to exactly what they actually need, then the key points and the independent practice can really go a lot faster.
Yeah, no, I mean, I would agree. Great. So I would love to start by looking at standard. So if you want to pull your computer up and pull up standard 6.1, RL 6.1. And take a second. I can give you a piece of scrap paper. So kind of do this breakdown. I like to use the whiteboard usually, but we're over here. So if you want to break down the kind of like no and be able to do for this standard, and I will do the same. And then we'll compare. Cool. Walk me through, and I'm just kind of taking some notes too, so that when I share our BD notes, you'll have those all in one place. Walk me through the knowledge that you've got.
So for knowledge, they need to know that textual evidence is something that comes straight from the text. It's the author's words.
So you need to know what text evidence is,
They need to be able to form or they need to know what an inference is, that it comes from the text as well as their background knowledge. They need to know when they're supporting an inference that it can't be just a restatement of what that inference is. It's actually like, it's a statement that is supportive of it, but does not say it explicitly, because an inference can't come from the text explicitly. I think that's...
Yeah, I think that's good. I would just add two more if you want to just add two more. I think they need to know what explicit means, because there's sometimes like just finding like a fact that supports a claim, like something that's explicitly stated. And then the other one I think like you kind of were getting to, but I would say they need to know that some evidence is more relevant than others. Like there's or like you could argue like gradients of relevancy or something. They need to know that that exists. Because especially in some of these multiple choice questions that they're given where like they have to choose the best and there's multiple ones that are relevant. So that's like, if they don't have that knowledge, they're tricky. Good. And then, so talk to me, what do they need to be able to do?
So they need to be able to form an inference. They need to be able to choose evidence that is supportive, and we should add that it's the most supportive and it's the most relevant. And I think they also need to be able to evaluate a given piece of evidence for relevancy, which is kind of a separate scale from like going into the text and picking your own thing.
Yeah, especially given the way it's often assessed to evaluate the quality of evidence. I think like I had kind of similar. I said they need to just be able to identify generally relevant evidence, which you have. I said then identify the best evidence, which is kind of different than, I actually think you make a really good point, and I added that to evaluate the quality of given evidence, I think is good. I added one more thing that I think we should add that doesn't necessarily go with today's assessment, but I do think like in many of our assessments, they need to be able to explain why a piece of evidence supports an inference.
Interpretation piece of the TDQ model.
That's what I was thinking. Like if we were using like close reading responses, we'd want to have that in our standard breakdown. But I think for today, where we're just looking at the part of like identifying the evidence, I think we won't necessarily get to that level. Okay, so I think we've definitely got it. You're killing it on the standards breakdown. I would like to first look at. Let me make sure I've got my right. Yes. I have 4. You can, kind of, I think they were all really great, and I picked 4 because they like all picked very different evidence, but it works. So like you had 70% mastery on the multiple choice question, and so I was kind of like, we could look at you and I could have a side conversation later about the kids that picked different questions, like different answers, but I thought it'd be more valuable to look at this here. And so I love that Miguel wrote work hard, play hard. Not be nice. So why don't you take a second, go through these, and think about like what do we notice about the evidence, like these students' work, who definitely showed mastery on the choosing the correct evidence.
So these are definitely points in the text where we are showing that Tia Louise is greedy and dishonest.
So let's kind of say like what CFS do they meet? Like one, it's the evidence.
I think they did a good job of zeroing in on this, like a good part of the text where it's very rich in its description of Tia Louise, not just finding kind of an isolated piece of evidence, but they all went back to a part of the text where they were very much like describing who Tia Louise is.
Yeah, so it's directly relevant to where the reader would make the inference. Because they could have pulled stuff all over the chapter, right? Anything else you noticed that they have in common? Thinking about like the know and do.
All of them picked specific evidence from the text and didn't try and like put it into their own words.
Yeah, it's direct quotes. Yep. I think they all picked relevant. Like they picked directly relevant and they used direct quotes. Like that's what makes them successful, is that they chose it from the part of the text where they needed to make the inference, and they picked like the most relevant evidence, like at least for those ones. So now let's say, so it was like, so let's stamp that. They picked directly relevant evidence. Not because there's a lot in that chapter that they could have picked that would have like you could have made an argument for, but like not these kiddos picked like the best, and then we said it was a direct quote. So that's what we're looking for. They didn't summarize or anything like that. Because some kids didn't. So let's look at the kids that didn't get it. I thought these were indicative of, so we have Michelle, Eddie, and I want to say Yasmin, but I can't quite read them. So let's take a second, and what do you notice about these kiddos, like the differences here?
So Michelle, like, I think she obviously has an understanding of the text, but does not understand what is required when it's choose a direct quote.
Yep.
Or when citing textual evidence, because she kind of just gave a summary as to why, or how he showed he was greedy in the chapter. This one's really vague because it's not directly relevant to who Tia Luis is. It's Abuelita's assessment of him. And Yami said he was wearing the belt and left it there, which was not a direct quote or really strong evidence.
Yeah, yeah. So what's their gap? Like, take a second to think, okay, like, here are 3 kids, and I would say, like, we see that even in some of the kids that chose. Like, I thought their work was kind of indicative. Like, what gap? Like, what's the gap here? There's kind of like a 2-part gap.
I would say one of them is definitely, like, actually taking the evidence directly from the text.
Yep.
And then
knowing what evidence, what it means to pull evidence.
And then, like Eddie's, it's like the degree of relevancy, the which one is going to be the strongest support.
Yeah, and I think the other ones too, though, because even like what they talk about isn't the best.
Yeah.
So they are unable. So they don't pull. They don't pull direct. They don't pull direct quotes. That's one mistake I made. And then they don't pull the most relevant evidence. They pull, like, related evidence is what I used to always say. It's, like, related, not relevant. Because you could use some of that in, like, a larger essay where you're, like, making 12 claims. Like, you could make, like, multiple claims to argue, like, Abuelita's assessment of Tio. Not related, not relevant. Okay. All right, so we've got kind of the error. They don't know what it means to pull. They didn't pull direct quotes, and they didn't pull the most relevant evidence. So let's, like, kind of punch it. So we've got the error. But then if the error is that, what do we think the general, like, misconception, the actual, like, deeper misconception is, though? Because part of that to me is, like, a quick hit, and the other part is something that needs.
It feels like it's like a how can evidence support a claim. It's like a misunderstanding of what it means to be supportive of the claim.
So students didn't understand what it means to find directly relevant evidence that fully supports a claim. Let's stamp that one and you jot that down. So we'll go to that one. Let's just go ahead and write this down. Students didn't understand. So because they couldn't pull direct evidence and they weren't pulling the most relevant evidence, that reveals that they didn't understand what it means to find directly relevant evidence that fully supports a claim. Which is kind of cool. I mean, it was clear they understood the text because they all picked tangentially relevant, like, related evidence. You know, it was all kind of about Tio Luis. It was all sort of related to him not being a good person. You know? But they definitely weren't picking that, like, best evidence, that, like, most related. All right, cool. So given that we say, like, the deeper misconception here, like, the thing that we need to teach kids is that, like, relevant evidence, like, you got to find direct, like, finding text evidence means identifying directly relevant evidence that fully supports a claim without asking the reader to do, like, multiple steps in between. Model or guided discourse, given sort of, like, where the kiddos are?
I would say model.
Why?
Because there's kind of that can hit multiple misunderstandings kind of at once if they're seeing me pull it directly from the text and then think through which one is going to be most relevant and best or most supportive. And then I think I don't remember exactly how many made this error with their evidence choice, but it seems like right now we probably don't have like that strong enough base of kids that would be able to provide that.